Welcome to the Real Business Lifetime Lessons podcast, where Carolina business leaders get real about growth, grit, and leadership. Today's guest is Chris Goulet, managing partner of Birdsong Brewing Company in Charlotte, North Carolina. After earning his MBA from Wake Forest, he spent nearly a decade in corporate banking before leaving it all behind to start a craft brewery from the ground up. Since 2013, Chris has helped grow Birdsong into a Charlotte staple, blending business savvy with a passion for great beer and strong community ties. Welcome to the podcast, Chris.
Hey, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Excellent. So, we're going to leap right into your story. You began your career in corporate banking. What inspired your leap into the world of craft brewing?
I think it was a combination of things sort of happening all roughly at the same time. Going back to undergrad days or growing up in New England, I'd always kind of been a craft beer fan. I was never really interested in any of the kind of national macro brands. And so many years later, as craft beer started to grow a little bit in the North Carolina market, I had kind of hit a point in my banking career where I guess I just wasn't very challenged. I had a role that was pretty boring. And I met this young home brewer, and he was very talented. And so I just kind of started researching and kind of for fun, I guess, sort of building a business plan. This is back in 2010. And it all came together. I managed to get some friends to invest, and I managed to figure out how to kind of exit the bank. And so we actually started in 2011, but I wasn't at the brewery as an employee till 2013. And it grew so fast in that interim period that it basically required all my focus. So it was kind of a nice thing to see that it took off, and it, there wasn't really any other choice besides devoting all my time to it. So
Well, I mean, it's a good thing when a new business venture grows quickly enough to need your attention.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, because a lot of them don't, right?
How did your background in finance shape your approach to launching and running Birdsong?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I definitely have a pretty different perspective on how to operate the business, how to run the business than a lot of my peers who run other breweries in the Charlotte area. Some of them are engineers, some of them were teachers. Like everybody has kind of a different background, right? One of them was a commercial pilot. I immediately wanted to know all of the metrics, all the numbers, and try to run a business that was really efficient and had very little waste, because that way it gives you more flexibility to take care of your staff and to have a reasonable, affordable pricing so your customers are happy, right? So if you focus on the costs that you're incurring and make sure you're staying as efficient as possible, that helps a lot. And so it was also really helpful, especially when we expanded in 2014, 2015, we expanded from a little 4,500 square foot space that we leased to a 17,000 square foot building that we had purchased. And so there were a lot of moving parts of the SBA loans and owner occupied financing, and all that was very easy for me, which is nice.
Birdsong was among the first few breweries in Charlotte. What were the early days like, and how did you gain traction?
We had no idea what we were doing. So we were a brewery started by two bakers and one banker. We could make beer pretty much relatively consistently, but everything else we kind of figured out on our own. But the craft beer industry is really unusual, as far as I could tell, in that for the first 10 or 12 years we were in it, it's really more about co-opetition. So people are very open and very accommodating. And so in the first year or two, I just had speed dial to lots of other brewery owners, and they would answer any question I had. Sometimes some of them would even show up and like help out. Scott Pyatt was a guy who ran Catawba Valley Brewing Company before he was able to sell it. And he was a huge resource and just full of all sorts of great advice. And so you don't really know what you're doing, but you have a lot of resources, and we were able to figure it out. But the nice thing was there were really only two other breweries or three other breweries roughly operating in Charlotte. And so once we were discovered, we were able to grow pretty quickly, because at that time, people were just very excited that it was made in Charlotte. And so that was kind of the only marketing trick you needed in the first couple of years.
We definitely feel that in Columbia with our local breweries too. Like, you want to go to the one that's right down the street, part of your community. What's one challenge you didn't anticipate when starting a brewery, and how did you deal with it?
I think I'm still in the process of learning how to do this. So, dealing with employees, how do you motivate them? How do you reward them? How do you keep them on the straight and narrow, performing their tasks efficiently and hopefully cheerfully? I had come from a banking environment where everybody was a professional, most of them with graduate degrees. We all knew the etiquette, we all knew the communication rules, all that stuff. And then moving into what is sort of weird blend of service industry factory, our employees come from all over the place and have all sorts of different backgrounds. And so everybody's a little bit special, and you have to give everybody a little bit of a different management approach. And it's easy for me to forget about that and try to be more efficient with my time. And then that sometimes is not as effective dealing with staff.
Sure. Sure. Yesterday, I was chatting with a business owner who talked about the challenges of bridging between white collar and blue collar and how everybody
Hmm.
needs a little bit different communication. How do you lead and manage a team that may not come from traditional business backgrounds?
You have to communicate all of the time, and it's really important to feed them a lot. They love free lunch.
My team does as well. I can't really argue with that.
Yeah, it's pretty effective.
What's been one of the biggest lessons you've learned about leadership over the years?
I think consistency is really pretty important, and I think it's not necessarily that you make a decision and that's what you stick with. It's that you're constantly communicating about what the business goals are and how we're going to achieve them. And when they change, because tactics or strategies will change, that you're clear and communicating about that change. I know some small business owners who feel like the business is just an extension of them. And if they change their mind, they change their mind. Like, now we're doing this instead. And for the most part, employees don't like that, right? They want clear direction. If it's going to be different than it was last month, that's no big deal as long as they know it's different and they understand why. I definitely have talked to and worked with small business owners who are much more like, I'm the boss. I'm going to do whatever I want. Like, this is what we're doing now. And there's not a lot of communication or socializing. And I think that causes failure. Not necessarily of the business as a whole, but like whatever that project is, if it wasn't clear why we were doing it or what we're trying to accomplish, then a lot of times it doesn't get done.
So, how do you make sure everyone on your team is aligned when it comes to clear and consistent communication?
Yeah, good question. I don't know. Do you know?
In my case, I think it's a lot of repetition and a
Yeah.
lot of repeating. This is why we're doing it this way.
Yeah, we try to just use a lot of different methods of communication as well. So every Monday we have a little sync meeting with the different department heads, and they all hear what we're looking at that week from an inventory perspective, if there's anything interesting going on, beer release or event wise. And so they're all on the same page. And so when they're talking to their teams, they've all been caught up at the same time. And then we send out notes from that meeting to everybody. And then we use Slack to communicate across all the teams. But we're also constantly having random hallway conversations or group texts or whatever. So we do communicate a lot, but if it's something that we really need everybody aligned with, yeah, we probably say it 5 or 6 different times through different routes. And usually that mostly works.
That's a psychology number too. Like, you got to hear something 7 times before it sticks. But
Mhm.
I could be completely inaccurate on that. Nobody quote me on that. Go Google it and find out for yourself.
I think that's a trick for memorizing people's names. You like say their name to yourself 7 times.
I would imagine that a lot of people think that owning a brewery is all about the beer. And in our discussion previously, you've mentioned that that's definitely not the case. Can you share more about the behind the scenes responsibilities of your business?
Yeah, sure. It's actually sort of funny because now in our 14th year, our production process is pretty refined, pretty dialed in. It is more manufacturing than cooking, right? It's like you definitely have a lot of metrics that you're hitting. And so we don't worry as much about the quality. Like, the beer is consistently good across all the styles. And so we spend a lot more time reaching out to customers, trying to gain market share, trying to get new placements on shelves, new taps. We spend a lot of time on logistics because we self-distribute across our kind of the Charlotte metro area. Myself and my business manager spend a bunch of time on various and sundry finance and insurance and benefits and all that stuff. We offer a full benefits package for all of our full-time people. So there's just a whole bunch of moving parts when you're dealing with 40 different vendors and 30 different employees. So yeah, so the beer probably takes up 1 hour of my day, maybe.
So, what is something you wish you'd known before you became a small business owner?
How much of a pain local regulatory agencies are.
Mm.
It is mystifying to me how obstructionist and challenging local government and state government can be because they just have no concept of what a small business is or what it's trying to accomplish. And so some of the codes and regulations are just foolish. And the people who are enforcing them don't have any real world experience to sympathize. So they're just like, no, this is the rule. Like, this is why you have to have this many toilets, or like, this is why this walkway has to be at this particular angle. It's just across all of the different groups you work with that they really just don't get how business functions. And so what they're trying to enforce, it doesn't make any sense. So you just placate them, do what they tell you, and hopefully they leave early. But in my mind, if I ran a municipality, which I don't even know what that means, but like if I was the mayor or the governor or whatever, I would try to eliminate as much of that as possible because all that does is increase costs for small businesses. And if it's not directly resulting in improved safety of the citizens, then it doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah. We'll have to talk about that offline since my spouse is a regulator.
I mean, I'm sure he does a great job, but it's.
What has surprised you the most about entrepreneurship?
I think the thing that I wasn't prepared for, and I think I've gotten better at this, but because the brewery is your baby, this business is kind of something you built from nothing, and now it has customers and employees and stakeholders and nonprofits we work with. And when things don't go well for a period of time, like it can be a lot more emotionally draining than I was ready for. Working at a large bank, if the bank has a bad quarter, like you don't take it personally, right? You're like, bummer, we had a bad quarter. Like my bonus might be slightly smaller, right? Whatever. But if the brewery has a bad quarter, like, I feel it. It's actually an emotion. It's a low, right? And then when the brewery has like a really great quarter, I feel surprisingly better. I didn't expect the emotional link to the business. And I think now I've gotten enough experience where I can be a little more arm's length about it and not get quite as affected. But that's only after practicing a lot.
Yeah, there's this concept as a small business owner that we're working even when we're not working because our brain is still working on problems, even if we've left the office or left the brewery
Hmm.
for the day. And for people who have not had that experience, I guess it's difficult for them to grasp. What's your take on the future of the craft beer industry in the Carolinas?
I think we are finally at a little bit of a healthy consolidation phase. I think we expanded way too fast. When we opened, we were the 62nd or 63rd brewery in North Carolina to open. In 2018, 80 breweries opened in North Carolina. The ramp up and the rapid expansion of breweries was just bad for the business. There are so many people coming into the industry, and a lot of them were making mediocre product. And so we greatly increased the supply and reduced the quality of craft beer all at the same time. 2020 probably would have been the year when a lot of that consolidation started, but COVID interrupted that, and then all of the government stimulus extended it. So now we are seeing, I think, what I would consider to be more of a healthy opening closing mix where breweries are closing that can't make their business model work. And there's some consolidation happening, which I think is good because it gives a little bit of breathing room for the other breweries that are operating and they can gain a little bit of share. I would imagine this kind of phase goes on for a while because there's just so many breweries and a lot of them I know from personal experience are losing money and still operating.
Mhm.
Um, I think we'll see it turn into more like the restaurant industry, where you've got people who are doing really well, people who are fine and comfortable, and then people who are closing, and somebody else goes in that space and gives it another shot.
Well, you received a lot of guidance and mentorship when you were starting Birdsong. If there was somebody younger or newer in the industry starting and they were reaching out to you for Not trade secrets, but maybe a little bit of guidance on hanging in there and whatnot. What's some advice you would give them?
I mean, I think I've modified my advice finally. For years, my advice was always don't do it. It's way harder than you think. But I think now I've realized that there are some things you can do. Um, you know, I always go back and tell people, like, make sure you really do know your numbers. Like, you may be making a decision based on information that's not right. So if you don't really know your costs or you don't really know what your staff needs, you need to dial that in and have that down because you need to make the call based on facts. And so some people, I think, because a lot of us have the same thing where we have this emotional attachment to our brewery. If something's not working, your reaction is to try to figure out how to fix it. And sometimes you're making an emotional decision, and that's not necessarily going to be the right call.
What would you hope that listeners would take away from your story?
I guess a couple things. Small business is really tough. So if you do want to do something, it's going to be a ton of work. You're going to be emotionally invested. You may lose money. But I think the other thing is, like, if you're in an industry that's not inspiring to you. So for me, finance was fun, but in some cases, but in a lot of cases, it wasn't. I didn't find it really personally enriching. Like, you can switch to something completely different. You're going to make a bunch of mistakes, but you're going to learn a lot, which is good. Like, learning is life. You can switch to something different that's exciting, and it's risky, but it's doable.
So, pop quiz. From the standpoint of learning and developing yourself as a leader, is there a book or podcast or YouTube channel that you personally look to and might recommend to our listeners?
I need to look up the name of it. There's this great book about Ben and Jerry's when they started, First Scoop or something like that. And I felt that was so helpful to get direct insight into these two founders. Now they're making ice cream. I make beer. It's not really the same thing, but it's kind of the same thing. But it's just so cool because they had no money. They had no business starting this business, and they were figured out all sorts of things to make it work. And it's just really neat to watch those two founders and what they figured out and how innovative they were.
Well, there's definitely value in being what I would call scrappy, but
Yeah.
my business coach has made me adjust that to resilient. Oh, well, Chris, I really want to thank you for taking the time to be with us and share a little bit of your journey with our listeners. If people wanted to connect with you or Birdsong, where would be the best places for them to reach out?
Definitely follow us on Instagram. We have a really fun Instagram feed. Our social media manager does a great job. We're just at Birdsong Brewing. And then, I mean, people are welcome to just email me, Chris at birdsongbrewing.com. I like chatting. If you're in Charlotte, come by for a beer.